Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Matthew Jane, and I am the Learning and Engagement Manager for the State Historical Society of Iowa. The Iowa History 101 webinars, presented on the second and fourth Thursdays of each month, explore Iowa's history from pre-statehood to current day. You can learn more about this series and all of our programs on our website at history.iowa.gov. Please remember to sign up for each webinar you would like to attend, and don't worry if you can't watch live. All programs are recorded and will be available on our YouTube page. Now, a few housekeeping points before I introduce our speakers for today. Everyone came into this webinar on mute with cameras off. Closed captions are available by clicking the closed caption button on your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Iowa Culture page of YouTube in just a few days. So you can check it out there if you missed anything today. I disabled the chat function, but if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. My colleague Rachel Hansen is watching that feature and will prepare a list of questions for the speakers at the end of the presentation. But please note we may not be able to get to all the questions before we end our time together today. And now I'm pleased to introduce our presenters. Mary Swalla Holmes grew up south of Madrid on a farm near the Des Moines River. The farm was previously the site of the High Bridge coal mine and is currently the site of the Hindu temple. She has a BA in anthropology from Iowa State University. During her career at Iowa State, she worked throughout Iowa as a community development specialist, helping communities to build toward a better future. She's now retired and has been on the Madrid Historical Society board for 13 years. Kristin Redenius was born and raised in Madrid, Iowa. Her dad and granddad were both area coal miners. She has been on the Madrid Historical Board for over 20 years. After her dad passed away, she has moved back to Iowa. She felt the need to continue her dad's passion for the history of coal mining in the area. She states, "We are thankful for all the former coal miners who didn't want this history lost and worked hard getting their area at the museum set up to preserve this important part of Madrid." And now I'm happy to turn over to Kristin to begin the webinar.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And you probably are wondering what two women know about coal mining, but with our family background and with our extensive time on the board and with doing a lot of research, we hope to give you a presentation today that you will feel like you know more about coal mining, especially around the Madrid area. Okay, coal mining was the very first mine in Boone County was opened in December of 1865, and that would have been a slope mine near the river. And it was opened by James Barclay, who happened to be my great-grandfather on my mother's side. So I had my dad and granddad who worked in the mines down here by Madrid. This particular mine was up by west of Boone, by Boonesboro. He only operated it for 2 years, and then he sold it to start farming. In 1910, mining was the second largest employer in Boone County, and the trend continued into the 30s. The first largest employer was farming. Coal workers and their families comprised 428 of the 1,449 people counted in Madrid's 1920 census. And coal mining during the Depression years and continuing to the mid-1940s was an important source of employment and income for many families. The coal mines brought employees from many European countries. Times were tough in Europe during the first part of the century, so Madrid was a very diverse ethnic community. And they all learned to get along and work together and live together. We were a mini United Nations. Okay, here's an example of a slope mine. And those are closer to the river. The veins are no more than 3 to 4 feet high. So you had to work laying on your side to pick at the coal. And they're cut into hills, and the coal cars went straight in and straight out. They were mostly family owned with very few employees. And this particular picture is an example of a slope mine, and it was made by Martin Burke, and it's a remembrance of the Sugar Valley mine that at age 16, he became part owner. He went to Des Moines and took the training to be certified in weighing the coal. And when he came back, the owner says, "I need you, you need me, I'm making you part owner." So he built this replica from his memory, and we're fortunate to have it here at the museum. The other type of mines in the area were the shaft mines. And those were the mines that were 200 to 300 feet below ground, thicker veins of coal, 5 to 6 feet high. It was a better quality of coal. It burned hotter and had less debris. Of course, it was more expensive to construct because you can see how in the picture there, that's a big area, a big building. And it also needed a second shaft for air. And they were not as safe as you can imagine with explosions, the slate falling, electrocution when they had electricity put in. And according to the local funeral director, they usually had at least one fatality every year. So they employed 200 to 500 people each coal mine, and they had 2 shifts. Here's a map of the area shaft mines showing you all the Scandia 1 through 6. And there's also a Fildy mine right above Scandia number 1. And also you'll see the railroad line. There's one going north and south and one going east and west. And we're not sure what came first, but they were both needed together. So the railroads and the coal mines kind of followed each other. Now the one going east and west is what's now known as the High Trestle Trail. Okay, we're going to look at each one individually. Scandia number 1, it was the shaft was put in 171 feet in 1906 for a 4-foot thick vein, and they acquired mineral rights for 1,400 acres. H. Zook was the superintendent. It used the room and pillar method, which I'll talk a little bit more about later because all of these mines use that particular method. It used steam engine for the fan and removing the coal, and it was shipped out via spur to the Milwaukee Railroad. So that little spur that comes south would take it back up to the Milwaukee Railroad.
Up here, yeah.
The vein worked out in 1921, and the mine was abandoned. And the next slide is just a drawing of Scandia number 1 to show you what it looked like. So it was in operation from 1906 to 1921. Scandia number 2. And that one was located just south of Madrid, 1.5 miles. If you are familiar at all with Highway 17, you'll see a sign on the west side of the road that says Zookspur. So the mine was back on that road. And this one was named for boss H. Zook. As you can remember from the first one, he was also involved with that one. And it was also named for the spur of the road. So that's why you get the name Zookspur. And it was started in 1911 and it ran until 1933. The coal was shipped to various parts of the state on the Milwaukee Railroad. It was equipped with electricity, and there was a coal camp of 500 people. And that was a very diverse settlement. And here's a little picture of the coal camp. The company houses, which are there on your right, rented for $8 per month. And you'll see the little boy standing there by the pump. And then you'll see another pump on down 3 houses or so. And so they had to share the pumps. They had to come out, pump their water, and they had to share that with someone, with the others in the 2 or 3 houses next to them. And you'll also see a gate on this first one. I would imagine they had some chickens, maybe some pigs, and they always had gardens because they were growing things to eat and to can. There was also a school at the coal camp. There were 3 churches at this one. One was for white Protestants, one was for black Protestants, and there was a Catholic mission church. And they had the company store, and you remember the song about I owe my soul to the company store. Well, that's an exact saying. And they had the pool hall and a bakery, baseball diamond, there was a lot of good baseball players that grew up in the coal camps around this area. And then, of course, there was some winemaking, maybe not legal, but there was some winemaking. And the coal camps were known to be a little rough. Okay, Scandia number 3, as you can see with the big blue arrow, opened in 1916. It's on the west side of the river, just like Scandia number 1. It was opened in 1916, and in 1917, the Des Moines River flooded the passages and the mine closed. And it was too bad because it was a good quality of coal, and they used the latest of mining equipment. So that one got flooded out. Scandia number 4, and that was just south of Madrid, just on the southwest part of Madrid, right behind the cemetery. That one was started in 1916 and lasted to 1943. It was the largest in tonnage and it lasted the longest. It used electric mining equipment and steam engines. The workers lived in Madrid, so they didn't have to have a coal camp. And at one time, it employed 400, which was the largest in the state. Then we go to Scandia number 5, which has had several names. It was originally known as High Bridge. And that's the one that's further down on 17, where it was right behind where the Hindu temple is now, if you're familiar at all with that area. And that's 3 miles south of Madrid. In 1907, they sank a 220-foot shaft and found a 4-foot vein. And that happened to be on the same horizon as Scandia number 1. That's maybe why they thought there might be coal there. It was steam engine powered fan and hoist. In 1913, they sank a second shift known as High Bridge number 2, but that operation ceased in 1914. And then it was left alone until 1926 when Scandia Coal Company opened it as Scandia number 5. And then it operated until 1932, and it also had a coal camp. And here is a picture of the High Bridge mine prior to 1926. You see the coal car and all the workers, they have their hats on with their carbide lights. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, then we go to Scandia number 6, which is located 2 miles east of Madrid. And that one operated from 1926 to 1939 as Scandia number 6. And it had tonnage of 50,000 tons, employed 175, and that coal was shipped east by the Milwaukee Railroad. And after it closed, smaller mining operations sprang up to supply coal for local consumption, and that reopened after World War II as the East Madrid Co-op Coal Company and closed for good in 1949. But an interesting fact about Scandia number 6, it was also known as the Eagle Mine, but when the shaft was dug in 1926, the hole filled with water, so the crew went out for their lunch, hoping the water would subside. They found out that they had hit an underground river. When the water ran down into the mine shaft, it picked up a lot of sulfur, which turned the water an ugly orange color. It ran into a tile line and into a creek. The creek ran through a farmer's land. The farmer had mangy hogs, but when the hogs wallowed in the muddy orange water, the mange healed. So this particular mine is just 200 yards north of the railroad. So it's very close to what's now the High Trestle Trail. Okay, the next slide is of the Fildy Coal Company, which was just north of Scandia number 1 on the west side of the river. And it was started by Mr. Phillips, the then president of Phillips Coal Company, who then became one of the leading independent oil magnates, in other words, Phillips Petroleum. The coal camp at Fildy was the shortest lived of the area coal camps. It was only 5 years in duration, It also had the grocery store, pool hall, and a one-room schoolhouse. And this is just a quick little timeline of the different mines. The first one opening in 1906, the last one closing in 1943, except for Scandia number 6, which then turned into the East Madrid Co-op Coal Company, which closed for good in 1949. Now we're going to look at some coal mining jobs. And the miner himself is only a part of the extensive underground network of employees. And he was paid by the tonnage and had to supply his own tools. So you can see the miner in the picture. He has a pick on a wooden handle. He had to carry in his own picks to replace when it was broken, not sharp enough, or whatever. So he had to carry in his own picks in order to do his job. The others that work in the mine were classified as company men. And one thing I'll note here is that the businessmen in Madrid particularly always remembered the armored car from Des Moines. It would pull up in a certain spot, and they brought the employees' payroll in envelopes and paid them in cash, because at that time it wasn't safe in the banks. So the businesses in town were flourishing. They liked the miners. Okay, and here's another picture of the miners. You can see them with their headlamps on. They worked at least in pairs in case one of the headlamps went out. Now, in case both of the lights went out, there was also a wire along the top of the timbers that they could follow all the way from the room that they were working in case, they both had their lamps out. And another thing to think about, if both lamps went out, maybe they should be leaving anyway, because the air was maybe not of the quality that it should be. You've heard about the canary and the coal mine. And here's the miner at our museum. He's drilling a hole into a coal bed, which is actually just the foundation. And then the hole would be filled with blasting powder using the brass spoon to put it in. It would be tapped in. And fuses would be lit by the inspector at the end of the shift. The coal would be there then for the next shift to take out. And the little miner at our museum, there's a sign down there that says Iowa coal miners were iron men. And that whole display won an award at the Iowa State Fair several years ago. And of course, it was constructed by our own miners. The company men consisted of those who laid the track, those who did the timbering, and those who drove the mules, and eventually the electric cars. And this picture shows the guy doing the timbering. So they had the posts that would hold up the ceiling, and they would put the timbers horizontal and vertical so that and they would notch them so that they would stay together. And their main goal is to make sure that the miner continued to dig the coal and it reached the top so that it could be sent out, put on the railroads and on its way somewhere. Okay, I had talked earlier about the room and pillar method, and that's what was used in this area. There's another method that's known as the long wall, but you have to have the more secure rock above the mine. So they use the room and pillar method to help hold up the ceiling. And they didn't want anything falling down, which happened frequently. And also in this picture, you can see the main hoisting shaft. Okay, and then further down the air shaft. You had to have the air shaft so that you had the air coming in and going out. And then they would go and they would timber up look like a hallway, and they'd go back into a room and they would mine out the coal, and then it would go up the elevator, that mine hoisting shaft. That's where the workers came down and where the coal went up. And they needed a square foot timber to hold the shell up to create a room to work in. So that's a picture of the room and pillar method. Here's another picture at our museum. The cagers were the ones who transported the coal cars to the cage or the elevator. They called it the cage, but we know it as, think of it as the elevator. And then the spragger stopped the cars on the tracks. And the spraggers used a wooden piece that fit over the track to stop the coal car. It was dangerous for your fingers. Now, my grandfather designed one with a longer handle and was able to keep all of his fingers. And then once the coal car was, it was loaded on the cage and they would alert the worker above. So he operated the hoist to hoist it up. Each mine car weighed 2 tons when full, and it was pulled by an 8-ton motor. And prior to the motor, it was pulled by mules. And I have a little story here. This we found from a 1980 interview by the Iowa Labor History Project that my dad had been asked some questions. We did not find this till after he had passed away. And it was because of working here at the museum that I was in contact with someone who told me about it. So the question that he was asked, when you went to work there, what was your first impression of the place? Boy, I tell you, I was scared to death. In fact, I went with my dad, you see, and when he was caging that coal and I was to be his helper, they bring the coal trips in, pull them in, and they'd start them on the goal, and then you'd throw a switch. Then the motor would come this way and those cars would coast down. They came a rumbling down there, and I was supposed to stop them. You had a little wooden blocks you put underneath. The first trip that went down, I took off. I was scared to death. If it hadn't been for my dad, they'd have gone in the sump where they were supposed to go up. He said, "Kid, that ain't what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to stop them." Well, the next time when they came in, I got a little braver, so I stopped them. But it was, close quarters and that rumbling. I was just a kid, just 16 years old. It scared me. It actually scared me. So that was a story that we found that we had never heard before. But when you're 16 years old, I think things are, when you have to work in the mines, a little tough. Okay, mules were used in the mine for the season. They usually had to slow down in the spring when the coal wasn't needed as much. And when they were brought out of the mine, they would have blinders on to adjust to the light. Later on, they used electric motors, but when they had the mules, and the mules were housed at the Helms Farm, which is now part of the museum property, and that's south of Madrid, right on Highway 17. And driving the mules was very dangerous. The narrow passageways, and the driver had to make sure his head was tucked in or it might rip off. And the mules, they were amazed at how they could find their way in total darkness. Okay, surveyors was another important job of the mine. They had to make sure that the farmers who owned the land above the mines got their mineral rights. And you can see various names over to the sides. Those were all farms. This is a picture of the underneath of Scandia number 4, and that actually goes all the way down to Highway 215, which goes to Polk City. So during the Depression, the mineral rights made a big difference for a farmer being able to keep their farm. Many farms were lost during the Depression, but those above the mines were able to keep theirs because of their mineral rights. Okay, here's a picture of a miner going to work. And this is the only picture we have in the mine of a miner going to work here at the museum. So this is a very valuable picture to us. They didn't take a lot of pictures back then like they do now. We'll start with the cap. Okay, he has his carbide light attached to his cap. A carbide was a chemical compound used to light the lamps, and it gave off just kind of a blue shade. They put the carbide in the bottom of the lamp, and then they used water and filled it to the top, and they used a flint to light it. There was just a little thing that a flint that would light it. They couldn't use matches because they would get wet down there, dark and damp in the coal mines. And this was a soft-sided hat, which the workers liked. The supervisors used the hard hats, but they couldn't convince the miners because the miners thought the others were more comfortable. And like I said before, the lamps was their only light to see in the dark mines, especially until electricity came, and they still wasn't able to light all of it. And then next you see the lunch box, and that's how or the lunch bucket. That's how they carried them. In the bottom part of the bucket, that would be for water, for drinking, and for their lamp. And then the next compartment would hold their lunch. It was a bucket and then two things stacked on top of it with the lid. And the next compartment held their lunch, and then there was a small compartment for their cake or pie or whatever they were sent with for that day. So, and if your job included needing picks, you would carry that rack of picks on your back. The picks would lie flat, and a little seal thing would come over it. And we have one of those here at the museum, and you can hardly lift it up, but they carried that on their back when they went into the mine. So that's what he looked like when he went to work. Okay, this next picture is of the Miners Union. This picture is actually from the 1934 convention held in Indianapolis, Indiana. We had 3 local men who represented our mines, and the blue arrow is pointing at John L. Lewis, who was the president of the UMW from Lucas, Iowa. And most of those miners just felt like he walked on water. They thought he couldn't do anything wrong. He helped them so much. He established the 8-hour workday. He established that you had to be 16 years old by 1929. We have stories here in the museum of 8 and 9-year-old boys working alongside their dad prior to then. In 1946, he bargained for health and retirement benefits. In 1960s, they bargained for higher wages. And in 1969, the UMW convinced Congress to enact the Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act, which provided black lung compensation. You had to have an x-ray that showed that you had the black in your lungs, and you had to have worked in the mines for a certain period of time. My dad did receive that. However, the only time it really bothered him was in 1982, at the age of 69, he decided the whole family needed to go to Colorado skiing. So up in the high altitude, he coughed up some black, but it was there. That's for sure. And I have a little story that about the union that I found that he remembered when he was working a night shift. Machines had come in, they'd cut coal with machines and loaders. They got a little bit too hoggish. This is him talking about the company. They got into some high coal, a 6-foot coal, and they didn't leave enough support. They're supposed to leave so much coal to hold the weight. Well, they got hoggish and slimmed it down, and it started to come in. I wasn't working for this boss, but this boss came out and he wanted us to volunteer and go in there and get machinery out. Well, there was one thing about the union. If you felt like you weren't safe, you didn't have to stay in there and you wouldn't lose your job. That's the one thing they couldn't make you do. Well, I went in there with others. We were going to take out the machinery, and we leaned up against one of the timbers, and he could feel it move. He says, "This is no place for me." And so they all left, and they ended up and lost a lot of machinery in there, but they didn't lose any lives. But he always felt like the boss had a grudge against him for not staying in there and helping him. But you had that privilege. If you didn't feel safe, you didn't have to go in there. And he said, "I didn't feel safe." The life of a miner. Wages in 1910 were $2 per day. In 1929, they were $3.85 per day. In 1943, they went up to $5.65 per day. Health insurance was $1 a month as a single, $1.50 as a married, and you had the company doctor. And I know the company doctor came out and delivered my two oldest sisters. You had the mine whistle at the start and the stop of each shift. The mine whistle would go off, but if you heard the whistle during the shift, that meant trouble. Now, the miners, this was a tough job, but you have to remember too that this was a job that was prevalent during the Depression. So for them, they had to work, and a lot of people weren't able to. So it was a tough job, but at least it was a job. And the women's role in the coal camps. Of course, the women weren't just sitting around doing nothing. They were caring for the children. They were cooking on their wood stoves, carrying in the wood and whatever for that, cleaning, gardening, canning, preparing the baths. When the miner came home, they had to have the water hauled in and heated. And of course, they were raising chickens and hogs or whatever they were able to raise in their little yard, taking care of clothing, making clothing. And sometimes they also provided housing for the single men. Even though those buildings were very small, they would, if they were able to make some money by housing a single miner, they did. And I want to read a few things. We have remembrances by Josephine Polly Hoffman, growing up in a coal camp in the 1920s, and I just love the way she writes it. And she has since passed away, but we were able to get a recollection of her memories, and they're very precious to us. Today, in the twilight of my life, with the nights getting longer and the years growing shorter, I reflect on the days of my childhood. Oh, those days. The dismal appearance of the camp did not spoil the harmony of its residents. Here, Italians, Greeks, Germans, Swedes, Slavs, and other immigrants lived together in union. Race was inconsequential, as we were all poor together, and we tried to enjoy that poverty to the hilt. Cleanliness and neatness were also present. Every day, the housewives would scrub their little houses, porches, and outhouses, and every night they would wait for their coal miners to come home, wait for them with a neat house, coffee, and a treat, after they had bathed in a shed next to the house. Every day, when the sun was out, the women would get out a large tub, and after many trips to the pump, fill it with water. Then the water was left in the sun to warm. In the winter, hot water was carried from the house to the shed, a tedious chore. There was always a garden around each house, and of course, with that, the canning. Everything was canned: apples, tomatoes, any fruit, and our Scandinavian neighbors even canned chicken. The camp had a store run by an immigrant, and a kinder person couldn't have existed. His eldest son used to come to every house each morning to collect orders from the housewives to be delivered in the afternoon at no charge. He never cheated us. In fact, he was generous. More than once, my mother, being short of money, would say, "Would you let me have $2 worth of groceries? Put it on my bill, and I'll pay." And I'll pay when we come in on payday. He never refused. When we went to pay our bill, that day was a great day because everyone who paid got a sack of candy. How I enjoyed that candy. And as I mentioned earlier, there was some winemaking going on. And then this was her recollection of, we would hear the whistle blow when this work started and ended. But if you heard 3 whistles at any time, it meant tragedy. There were many accidents: electrocutions, bad air, flooding, cave-ins. I lived through many of them and saw mangled bodies of humans toiling so that they could exist. It was years later before a union stepped in to make things a little safer. Eventually, after a long struggle, the union came to the mines. Working conditions improved, and there were now showers for the miners who could no longer have to remove the grime of their labors in a shed at home. But my proud father refused to bear his nakedness to his fellow workers and refused to use them. So my mother had to continue to prepare a bath for him in the shed every day. I thought that part was pretty cute. Anyway, her son, who was living in California, came to visit, and his mom had always said that this was her heaven. She loved this area. She never moved back here after she left, but she had this vision of this just being the perfect area. And he came out to visit, had never visited before, and he went back to California, sent some money because he wanted to have a monument or marker built in the Boxtown area. The Boxtown area of Madrid is the southeast corner of Madrid, where they moved all of the houses from the coal camps. When the coal camps closed, they would move the houses to that area. For some of the ones that still worked at Scandia number 4 to move into, or even after the mines closed. They've been remodeled on, and some of them tore down or whatever. But it's a unique part of our town, and he wanted that to be remembered. So he sent the money for this marker to be made, and it's actually four-sided. There's 4 different topics on each side. And we got it made, and we contacted him to come out to for dedication. We wanted him to be here when we dedicated it. And we couldn't get a hold of him, and we found out he'd passed away from a sudden heart attack. But 4 women who worked with him, had gone to school with him, knew him and his mother, came out for the dedication, and they spoke wonderful words about him and his mom, and about how much they knew that she loved this area. So we feel very fortunate that we now have a marker to signify that Boxtown area. One other thing I want to mention about women and coal camps and coal mining. Eleanor Roosevelt did visit a coal mine in Pennsylvania, but she's the only woman that's ever been down in one that we're aware of, because the coal miners thought it was bad luck to have women in the mine. Okay, so here's the reason the coal mines are gone. The railroads turned to diesel fuel, cutting the demand. And the coal from here was not as efficient, and it had more sulfur content than the coal from Wyoming. And as we mentioned before, some of the mines would flood. And World War II took many of the workforce. But according to ISU, there's at least 125 million ton still under Boone County. And after the war, a lot of the workers, since they didn't have a coal mine to come back to, they ended up working at John Deere or Firestone, which is not too far from here. And when the mines were closed up, they were filled in and virtually disappeared. I've only heard of one instance where a farmer came upon a hole while he was farming, and they figured that was the hole from an air shaft. And the coal around this area was bituminous coal, and it was a softer coal, and it comes from the remains of dead plants that were buried faster than they can decay. And the coal in Wyoming is called subbituminous because it has less sulfur. And there's also another type of coal, which is anthracite. It's a real hard coal. It has high carbon content and fewer impurities, and that's only found in the northeast part of Pennsylvania. And that's probably why there were steel mills in Pennsylvania, because that particular coal was helpful for the steel mills.
Okay, this is Mary, and I'm going to read to you a poem that Kristin found and felt like it really spoke to the miners of the mining community. God, we don't like to complain. We know that the mine is no lark, but There's pools from the rain. There's the cold and the dark. God, you know what it's like in your well-lit sky, watching the meteors whiz, warm with the sun always by. God, if you had but the moon stuck in your cap for a lamp, even you'd tire of it soon, down in the dark and the damp. But nothing but blackness above, and nothing that moves but the cars. God, if you wish for our love, fling us a handful of stars.
Okay, and here's a picture of our museum today. We have 4 buildings. The 3 on your right were gifted to the Madrid Historical by Margaret Kegley. She had a collection of dolls that she had both collected and made, and she had no heirs to give it to, and she wanted a place for them to be preserved. So those 3 buildings are a part of our museum, and the one on the end on the left, we were able to purchase that building. We shared the roof with the building that houses the dolls, and we wanted to be able to preserve that. In 1983, when we had our Madrid Centennial, the miners had a temporary exhibit in the basement of another building that's no longer here. And they felt that they really got such a warm reception with their exhibit that they wanted to have a permanent place. So with the acquisition of those 3 buildings that Margaret Kegley gave to the Madrid Historical, the miners were able to set up a display in the basement of the gray building. It was just a crawl space, and the miners, being who they are, dug out the crawl space, cement floor was put in, and they were able to set up their exhibit. So we've had that exhibit set up since 1991. And just west of our buildings is on the left of our buildings. There was a railroad that ran the north-south. So we were very close to the railroad that we saw in the very first picture. That was built in the 1880s. And the east-west route had the bridge over the Des Moines River that was originally built in 1912, 1913. And then in 1974, a bridge was built next to the old bridge, and then they imploded the old bridge. And the 1974 bridge was used for 5 years before the Milwaukee Railroad went bankrupt. Then the Union Pacific Railroad came in and removed the rails, the top part. It left the part that was in the water and the concrete pillars. And they used that to redo the Kate Shelley Bridge up in Boone. So the High Trestle Trail carries on our coal mining history. So the High Trestle Trail and Bridge, so it celebrates our coal mining history. The pillars in the middle picture there are embedded with coal, and the bridge itself is made to look like the timbers in the coal mine. And then here on the looks like an entrance to a mine, and that's at one of the entrances here in town to get on the trail. So the concept for the trail started in 2003, and they had the celebration in 2011. And the bridge has been a wonderful asset to this area, and we've had people from all over come. It's a beautiful thing. If you've never seen it, you do need to make time to come and see it.
We have a short video here of the mine in the museum, in the basement of the museum.
And here's the contact information about our museum. We're located 103 West Second Street in Madrid, and we're open at 10 to noon on Saturdays and 9:30 to noon on Mondays. We have community coffee. We have stories being told all along the table about what they can remember. And anytime you want to have a special tour, we have a number that you can leave a message and we'll get back to you. And our website, our Facebook page, our email. We thank you very much for spending your time with us today, and we hope that if you want to come and visit, that we can show you even more. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kristin and Mary. You've given me some new eyes to look at the High Trestle Trail with now that I know what to look for when I'm riding. We do have some time to answer some questions through the Q&A feature. So please remember, if you do have those questions, the chat has been disabled and you can submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom. We have a few that have already come through, and we may not be able to get to all of our questions. We have quite a few. So let's kick it off here with a bit about the miners. We have some questions about what was the typical age of a coal miner?
Well, they could start at 16 after 1929, and they worked until they were physically able to work. A lot of them didn't work real long because of an injury, and they may have, had to quit earlier. And then the mines closing by 1943, if you were 16 in 1929 and, worked till you were 1943, they were typically fairly young men.
And you had mentioned early on that coal mining, sometimes especially the shallow mines, were family-run businesses. Did each family member have a unique role that they played in some of the family-run mines?
I'm sure they did. It would have taken probably everyone to have a job to do. And if they didn't have enough family members, then they could hire some local. They were just a lot smaller mines that was used for local consumption. So, they just didn't have the need for the manpower like the shaft mines that went, down in the ground and had a whole lot more coal to get out.
Sure. We have some questions about the camps. So I'll kind of put a few of these together here. One of the first questions we had about the mining camps was about medical facilities. Were there any medical facilities that took place, especially at Zuxper that you mentioned, whether they were Native American or local midwifery, formal or informal?
I'm not sure.
Well, I think that mostly the doctors came out from Madrid. Our newspapers are digitized from 1906, and I've been studying, researching a woman doctor that operated in Madrid, and she does go out to the coal camps every so often. So I don't know that there were on-site doctors.
I don't think so. I think they may have been had an office here in Madrid. I know Dr. Cook, who delivered my two oldest sisters, he had an office here in Madrid, but he came out to the house to deliver at the home.
Mhm.
Of course, that wasn't in a coal camp, but I'm sure the same thing would have happened at the coal camp.
Mhm.
Sure. You mentioned the Scandinavian storekeeper's son. What other ethnicities of families were there in these camps?
Italian, Croatian, Slavs, just all of the Eastern European,
Mhm.
Italians, just a lot of different mix. And because they came over here because they had no work in their country. I know my grandfather came over. He was one of 12, and 6 of his siblings came to the United States, and 6 of them remained in Sweden. There just wasn't enough work over there for all of them.
Mhm.
And that's
We
what
have
happened a lot, you know, one would come over and then another family member would come over, or the man would come over and his wife and child would come in after he got a job in the mine, then they'd come and live with him in the camp.
Sure, a kind of chain migration that family
Right,
members and
right,
friends, by word of mouth or letters
right.
Yeah,
would
some
follow the
communities,
people
a
they
lot,
knew.
Yeah, I know there's some communities from northern Italy that had 4 or 5 families in the camps here. Yeah.
And I think this relates to a question that just popped up about um, the migrant miners in their own home countries. How would they know to go to Iowa for mining work instead of other locations like West
Well,
Virginia and Pennsylvania?
well, I know my grandfather went to the Chicago area because he had an aunt that lived there and she sponsored him. So she got him there. So he took the train from Ellis Island with a note on him, leave me off in Chicago. And so he worked for a farmer for a while, and then they found out there were jobs available, and he and a cousin came to do a job in southern Iowa, and then they found that there was work around Madrid here, and then that's why he ended up in Madrid.
We have a question about whether or not black and white miners stayed segregated in their camps and mines the way that they were in their churches.
I know that one of the mines did not allow the blacks. I'm not sure why. And I also know that sometimes when the miners would strike, and then they'd hire scabs, a lot of them would be the blacks from Des Moines would come up to work in the mines. So, but then I think there's others that probably work side by side. It just depends on the circumstances.
We do have some photos from the Zuxper School that have children of all black and white and children all together. I mean,
Yeah,
the
they
school
were-
was not segregated. We know that.
Yeah.
Was it possible that a miner could work their way up to a better position in the company?
Possibly. I'm not really aware of a lot that could, or that did. Um, I'm not aware of any that were able to do that. And I think the company men that actually owned the company and I don't know that there was a lot of supervisors down in the mine. I think it was mostly the head of the mine, and they wouldn't be able to take over a job like that.
Sure. We have some questions about the mining itself. How long was a typical mining season?
It would mostly go, there was just a month or two when it was shut down. Like I said, when they brought the mules out. Otherwise, it was pretty much all the time. And working 2 shifts in the shaft mines. I'm not sure that, and if there was a strike or something like that, then of course they would be closed. But just for a month or two that they'd take a break when there wasn't as much demand for the coal.
And for the coal that was produced in Iowa mines, was most of that coal used in Iowa or was it shipped out of state?
A lot of it was shipped out of state, yes, on to Chicago. A lot of it went to Chicago or points further east. Of course, the railroads used quite a bit too when they ran with coal. So there was a lot bigger demand for coal back then than what, now. It's doesn't get a very good rap. It's a little dirtier and environmentally not
Safe.
not safe. So, but back then, it was so abundant and it was used and
Sure. I have an old coal chute on my house, where the coal was shoveled
yes.
into the basement.
Yes,
Mhm.
Right
yeah,
from the
every house.
driveway. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm,
yes,
mhm.
and that's what
Yeah.
everyone would heat by, was using coal, and that's why every spring you had to do a good thorough house cleaning because of that coal dust that was around everywhere.
We have a question about mining companies and research. So, did mining companies preserve employment records? And if so, where can those records be found today?
We've not been able to find any. The only records we have of who worked in the mines were the ones who collected the names during the centennial, or that we've gathered off of pictures. They used to take a picture of all the miners in front of the mine, and we've been able to identify a lot of those, or those were identified for us by the miners. But we've not been able to find any employment information from the Scandia Coal Company.
We do have some union records.
We do have some union records, and those consist of those who paid dues and also some of their health records. We do have some of those, and those are just from one of the mines, and I think that's from Scandia number 6. I don't know. They were just found one day here in the museum. I don't know who gave them to us or how we got them, but we have them, and we have them in an easy order to find a name if you are looking for a name. We wish we had all those records. Oh, how we wish we had all
Oh,
those records.
sure.
Mhm.
Well, we're getting down to our last few minutes here, and I've got 2 questions left. So the first, and these are some more personal questions. Did your father talk about his day in the mine when he got home?
My dad liked to tell a lot of stories. So when I remember sitting around the kitchen table, especially on Sunday afternoons after a big Sunday dinner, he'd have stories to tell. It was mostly about some of the ones he worked with and things like that. He never lived in a coal camp when he and my mom were married, and he had moved out of the coal camp at a young age because his dad just didn't think they were as safe, and he wanted to. He rented a house in Madrid, especially when they started working at Scandia number 4. But they both initially started out at High Bridge, but they didn't live at the coal camp. But he had stories to tell of, especially of people, and they seemed to all enjoy the hard work, and they didn't complain about it. It was something that they were all proud of, and they wanted to preserve this history. And we are so grateful that they did, because they're all gone now, and we are doing our best to try to keep all this history going.
And it sounds like your community coffee hour is a great opportunity to continue that work.
Yes,
Mhm,
yes,
mhm.
Yeah.
it is.
So our last question here, before we wrap, we have, if people are to come to the Madrid Historical Museum, what else will they find in their time there?
Well, you'll find the doll collection that was given to us by Margaret Kegley. You will find area dedicated to the military, an area dedicated to farming, an area dedicated to our school. And we also have a bigger room that has Madrid business history, a map of Madrid back in 1950, and one in 2019. We have all the train information. We have the desk from the old depot. The old depot was torn down, probably shouldn't have been, but it was torn down. And we do have the desk out of that people would come up to buy their tickets. We have a lot of railroad information. We have pictures of the building of the 1912-13 bridge. We have a binder of all the information about the High Trestle Trail from the first conception, for the first meeting to its dedication and past. We have city information. We have the old jail that was in our the first building. The last building we bought was the fire station, city hall, and jail. And we have the old jail in there, which is a good place for kids to have their pictures taken. They love that. We have information about churches, businesses. We have a lot of stuff. And we try to limit it to Madrid related, but we have a lot of nice collections. And if you're wanting to come and visit, we'd love to show it to you.
Well, thank you for being such great presenters and great keepers and preservers of Madrid's history. With that, we'll extend our last thank you to Kristin and Mary, and hope that everyone will join us for future Iowa History 101 webinars that take place on the second and fourth Thursdays throughout the year. There are many great stories to tell in the upcoming months. For more information and to register for future webinars in this series or to watch recordings, check out our website at history.iowa.gov. Looking to learn more Iowa history, you can find and watch over 90 recorded webinars of past 101 programs on the Iowa Culture YouTube channel. We look forward to virtually seeing you for the next Iowa History 101 webinar on October 10th. The topic will be Broadlawns, a Century of Caring. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.